So I'm going to take you through a journey of my own. I came into the cannabis travel space in 2014 through a love of travel and some familiarization with cannabis as well, but really I was traveling a lot, came back to California in 2014 and walked into my first cannabis shop. And it was a Prop 215 days. It was the first time I'd ever seen that. I didn't know it existed. And it hit me like a tidal wave that this was moving forward. Legalization was going to come with adult use. And the cannabis travel trend and the hemp travel trend were going to eventually meet. And it was going to be packed with a lot of opportunity. So I went into it. I started studying the history of cannabis, the culture of cannabis, watching documentaries. And I became as inspired by cannabis and hemp as I was by travel. I felt like I kind of found this intersection that was really, really interesting. Because the more I learned about the cannabis story of California and even globally and the hemp story, it was really an interesting story that was very diverse, a lot of communities represented. It brought in agriculture and plants. And the more I looked at that cultural heritage and history, I realized that cannabis had been prohibited for less than 100 years in the history of mankind, which made me kind of realize we live in a very unique window of time. Cannabis was readily accessible going back to ancient China up until 1937, less than 100 years ago. It was sold on the shelf and prescribed in pharmacies throughout California and the United States at the turn of the century. It was even part of the American Medical Pharmacopoeia, the 3rd edition, and it was listed for all these ailments. And when I started learning all this, it just really was surprising and interesting, and I started wondering why. And then in 1937, of course, it was prohibited, but now we live in an era where cannabis and hemp and the information and the knowledge is finally getting out. And I think it stands to really improve the world. When you start looking at hemp as a renewable resource and the capacity it has to produce different products and elevate quality of life, and cannabis is much the same way. It's a wellness toolkit. It's a toolkit for well-being. It's been that. If you look back since ancient China, people have used it in different ways to manage their holistic health. And whether that bends into medicine or rec or adult use or wellness or well-being, I don't know what the definition is. But as when you look at the cultural studies of cannabis applied to ancient culture to today, you can learn a lot about how it was factually used. So anyways, I was inspired through all the stories that I heard, whether it was the ancient history or the culture or the Back to the Land movement or the activist movement in San Francisco with Dennis Peron and Brownie Mary. I kept learning these stories of cannabis legalization and why it mattered, and hemp legalization and why it mattered. And it really inspired me to start creating the Cannabis Trail. You know, I was looking at the Napa Wine Road and the Marin Cheese Trail, and I saw the future of a third pillar, a cannabis trail, to be that third leg of the Northern California experience for visitors in the future. So the Cannabis Trail is a multi-stop trail that travels through 9 counties. It's currently half built. We have 12 cultural landmarks that are already installed. You can see the landmark right there in the photo or up there on the screen. And really, each of these landmarks tell a story about a pioneer, a place, a moment in time where there was another element that happened that was really led to us being here today in this exhibit hall, having access to this information, these conversations, this data, all of it. You know, it's really these milestones of this human rights movement and patient access movement. So I wanted to touch on just a few of the stops as it currently exists, and we'll pick 3. So the first one I want to point out is actually City Lights Bookstore. You know, the beatnik movement, Allen Ginsberg, they're largely known for literary freedom. You know, beatniks were known for wanting to keep it real, like be, you know, unbridled freedom and trying to think outside the box. And aside from the coffee and cannabis narratives and the way beatniks dressed, they also really evolved the discussion around consciousness and awareness and what does that mean. And part of this cannabis and hemp story as it evolves is to evolve the story and color in those details a little more clearly. It was also the start of the modern day cannabis legalization movement was back then in the 1950s. So of course, a cultural landmark there, a point of interest. Another one is up in Sonoma County, Riverside Wellness. That's in West Sonoma County. There was a woman named Brownie Mary who used to bake brownies for HIV/AIDS patients in the 1980s at the height of the epidemic. And she had a significant bust in Sonoma County in 1992. They kind of knocked her door down. It was out in Cazadero, if anyone knows where that is. And it was this old lady baking brownies with glasses and white hair and looked like anyone's grandma. She was a volunteer in the hospitals down in San Francisco. So there's this big bust. They take her into jail. They take her to court. And they ended up letting her off because she was baking medicine for patients that were suffering. And there was no other alternative medicine at the time. It was helping people eat. It was helping people just not suffer. And it was human death, right? It was like the human death on a scale you've never seen. And these brownies and cannabis were working on the front lines of that. So when they busted Brownie Mary, something interesting happened. Because it was so kind of disruptive, seeing this old woman baking brownies in the woods up in Sonoma County and delivering them to the city, the media really grabbed hold of it. And there was this woman that was able to tell a new story about cannabis, and that was the medical marijuana era. And that kind of led to where we are now, too. Because shortly after that, in 1996, cannabis was medically legalized in California. It was the first state. It re-legalized it. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that was a story from Sonoma County. That's another stop along the cannabis trail. And we'll go ahead and pick one out from Humboldt County as well. And let's call that the Hemp Connection. So the Hemp Connection was the first hemp store in the United States. I believe they opened up back in the 70s, late 70s. And the woman, Marie Mills, is an absolute pioneer. I believe she's in her early 90s today. And everything in her store was made from hemp. It was paper, clothing. She used to buy hemp, weave mats. And it was a store where her kind of purpose and mission through her store was to teach people about hemp as a renewable resource, regeneration, sustainability. And that is also part of this hemp and cannabis culture in California, is this relationship with like Mother Earth and nature and embracing connection and being sustainable and regenerative. And it goes back generations. And that's one of those stories that as we try to combat sometimes THC and getting high or smoking can really take the air out of the conversation. And there is so much more to cannabis and hemp than that. And I think the education here in this exhibit, hopefully people can come out seeing something like that, whether it's something to improve their quality of life or whether it's just more awareness at how hemp and hempcrete and hemp batteries and all the ways, 25,000 products they've identified that hemp can create. And it's one of the most powerful renewable resources on Earth. So it's going to be fascinating watching this plant slowly kind of come out into the mainstream and all the good that it can impart in the world. So I want to invite you, if any of you are interested or enjoyed this exhibit, the Cannabis Trail is an extension of that. It's a trail that's 9 counties from Santa Cruz up to the Emerald Triangle and Trinity. And you can travel it and you can hear these cultural stories. And it's really meant to be kind of a supplement to the cannabis appellations that are starting to be established in California this year. The CDFA, the Department of Food and Agriculture in California, has been working for years on developing cannabis appellations like wine. And California is going to be the first. And it's going to happen toward the end of this year or early next year. So instead of grape varietals, we're going to be talking about cannabis cultivars. Like Cameron and Aaron were talking about, it's the grape, it's the plant, it's the fruit, it's the agriculture. It's not the bottle of wine yet. This is a celebration of the plant in the ground and all the therapeutic compounds that it houses and all the ways it can be applied to improve quality of life and a more sustainable earth. And hopefully we embrace it and we respect the plant and we navigate it the right way, informed, and we give people the information so they can be informed and learn how to interact with it if they so choose. So with that, I'm going to go to my next quick presentation here on a method that I've been developing for years. And it's really a build of what Aaron talked about earlier, the last presenter up here with Cameron. And it was about cannabis as a pairing tool, right? I told when I started this discussion, what brought me into cannabis was travel. I saw it. I thought I saw it unlocking. I saw adult use coming on board. And I saw cannabis is going to keep becoming more sophisticated. And there is going to be pairing methods. And we need to have information and guardrails to teach people how to use it in a way that's really meaningful. So I started developing this method called the effect pairing method of cannabis. And what the effect pairing method of cannabis is, it's the art of selecting and consuming a cannabis cultivar or varietal in an effort to optimally enhance an activity or experience, right? So let's be clear here. This also means CBD rich. There's CBD rich cultivars where that's the right appropriate choice for whoever wants to use it, and even in the effect pairing method. Now, if you decide that you want to use any kind of THC, and I use the word rich, with a caveat, because something people are still learning today is you have AC/DC, like the plants out there, which are incredibly CBD rich. And then you have higher THCA or THC flowers. And what's happening now that it's a legal market, you're seeing all these different cultivars of cannabis and hybrids filling in that whole gap. So you can choose a 1-to-1. You can choose a 3% IPA or a non-alcoholic beer or a daytime like light beer, or or you could do a triple IPA, right? Like a 25%. Cannabis is the same way, and we're now having these cultivars that are really making it accessible, right? So that's where this industry is headed. So the effect pairing method, when you start getting into the THC, let's say 2.5 milligrams or higher, 1 milligram or higher, then you start thinking in terms of flow state with the effect pairing method. And that's kind of an optimal state of mind, let's say. So let's dig into that for a second. So flow state is an optimal state of consciousness where sense of self, time, and space dissolve to feel present in the moment and completely immersed in an activity or experience, which could be a dining meal, it could be a foodie experience, it could be an art experience, it could be a time in nature, a nature hike. So right around there, that purple kind of box you see under flow state, you see optimal zone. So if you take cannabis, you think about the arc of that slight THC feeling, whether it's 1 milligram, it's just very light, or it's something a little higher depending on your tolerance. But your goal to really intentionally consume it and make it an enhancement tool for what you're experiencing, you want to be shooting for flow state, which will drive your intention of which cultivar you choose. Maybe it's in an edible form, and why you choose it, because you're going into an experience that you want to enhance. And I believe the effect pairing method is how cannabis is going to unlock. As food pairs with wine, cannabis pairs with activities and experiences. And as the knowledge gets out with cultivars, whether it's a joint, whether it's a beverage, whether it's an edible, I believe we're going to learn more and more about very conscious consumption with cannabis, especially those THC-rich cultivars, and be pairing them with whatever we're walking into. And for me, this goes through, of course, a travel lens. So I'm looking at itineraries. When are you having your best meal while you're in town? Are you going for a spa treatment? Because there might be a cannabis varietal that's a great precursor to that. If you're going to a Michelin star restaurant, there are cannabis cultivars and products that stimulate appetite, just like the munchies or, in the case of the 1980s, a medicine, right? The modern day version of that is cannabis as the new vermouth. It's cannabis as a precursor to prime your body for a great meal, and a cultivar that accentuates your palate, your taste, your texture. So my hope is the effect pairing method continues to get adopted throughout California in the travel space. So that's it on the slides. Just another minute to wrap this up. This has been an amazing experience. It's been 17 days. We've had an incredible team in this building, from Lahua Brands, who have been holding it down on the slushies and serving so many, teaching so many, people spilling out here, them answering questions, delivering education around terpenes and cannabis and cultivar, and giving amazing service to everybody. We have amazing vendors that have been in the booth doing the same. People spill in there, they're answering questions, sharing knowledge. Of course, the California State Fair team has been extremely supportive. We've had calls with the Department of Cannabis Control. This has been years in the making. And we're really excited about what we built here this year. And really, the cultivar team, the team that has been working for years to bring this together and find those amazing partners like SC Labs, our presenting sponsor this year, Colas, who has 6 locations in Sacramento, a cannabis retail shop. This is a new platform of education so people can learn and hopefully integrate cannabis and hemp into their life in some way, whether it's, replacing plastics, or whether it's a high CBD topical, treating pain, and improving quality of life, or if it's smoking a joint at the end of the day to relax and choosing that over alcohol, there's space for all of it. So thank you all for being here at the Cannabis exhibit. We'll see you next year as well. We're going to be open for a few more hours. But yeah, thank you for coming through today. Again, my name is Brian Applegarth. Appreciate it.